Star Trek The Original Series, Season 1, Episode 4, The Naked Time. This was suggested via YouTube comment by Qbert Champ. So thanks for the suggestion, Qbert Champ. And I've talked briefly about Next Generation's The Naked Now. And this episode is obviously the origin of that episode. And sadly, there is no naked time in this. It's figuratively naked time. It's just a bunch of drunk crew members. And it's weird. It's weirder than I remembered. Especially the science. The science in the original series is always a little sketchy, but this episode really goes off the rails when it comes to that. And you don't even really notice it because you're focused on what's happening with the crew. The space virus gets everyone drunk and crazy, basically. It's a hell of a party. And while we're all concerned with that, nobody really pays any attention to what's happening with the planet below. It's really strange, and I think we should just get right into it. The episode opens up with the Enterprise orbiting a planet called Psi 2000. It's a frozen world, and they are there to pick up a scientific party that's been studying the planet. Spock and an officer named Tormalin beam down, and they're wearing shower curtains. Literally. It's kind of incredible. I know the budget was really tight, but this is kind of insane. They're just wearing shower curtains. It's really no explanation for it. And they find the scientists dead. Some of them strangled, some of them just sitting at their posts, frozen to death. And one person died fully clothed in the shower. So it's pretty weird. And Spock scans the area with something that is not a tricorder. I don't know what's going on there. And then this Tormalin guy takes off his glove and some blood leaps onto his hand. That's pretty weird. It's almost like some John Carpenter shit. And then he touches his face. I mean, what is this shower curtain head piece doing? He just shoves his hand up the front of it. So it's obviously not protecting him from anything. It's just a hat on his head. So he's obviously infected with some weird goo now. It's a problem. And they beam back to the Enterprise. And there's apparently a decontamination sequence. But it takes place after they materialize, which is kind of pointless. If they were carrying something airborne, that would be pretty useless. Usually the transporter is the thing that filters out the pathogens before they materialize. But it's important to keep in mind that they haven't really established these things yet. I mean, this is the 4th episode of Star Trek ever. And Kirk reveals that they're here for a scientific measurement of the breakup of the planet. The planet is apparently breaking up. I don't understand how that's possible. Do planets do that? Do they just fall apart for no reason? They say it's decaying. And they can expect drastic changes in gravity, magnetic field, and mass. The planet is going to change in mass. I don't know. It just doesn't make much sense to me. But I got to stop trying to be Eddie DeGrasse Tyson over here. And Spock and Tormalin get examined by Dr. McCoy just to make sure they're okay. Everything checks out. And McCoy says Spock's pulse is normal at 242. 242 beats per minute? That's weird. I would think the average Vulcan pulse would be lower than a human's, not higher. But whatever, I guess he's just walking around with the resting heart rate of Barry Allen. And in the mess hall, Sulu and Lieutenant Riley join Tormalin for lunch. And Sulu's talking about fencing, which is interesting. Sulu is a weird character. They often give him these various interests, but we never see them again. Like, it's fencing in this episode. In another episode, he likes botany. And later on, we find out that he likes collecting old firearms. It's possible that he's interested in all those things, but we only ever see them once. I don't know. It's just weird to me. And Tormalin starts losing it a bit. He says humans have no business being out in space. He's ranting and raving, and he pulls out a butter knife. And we're all supposed to act like this is an intense moment. I mean, this knife looks dull even for a butter knife. It's more of a butter spreader. Have you ever tried to stab somebody with a butter spreader? It's an all-day job. And there's a struggle for the, quote, knife. They fall to the ground, and Tormland stabs himself. I don't know how he pulled that off. He must be made out of butter. That's the only explanation I can think of. And there's a lot of blood, dried blood, on his chest. And Riley gets up and calls for help on the intercom, and he's got sticky, contagious jizz on his hands. He's like rubbing his hands over and over. And Tormland eventually dies from his wound, which is pretty crazy. And that's a red flag for McCoy, because he shouldn't have died. And when Riley returns to the bridge, he's kind of the episode's navigator. He takes his place next to Sulu. And Sulu is also infected from the struggle with Tormland. And he says he wants to go to the gym and swing his sword around. And he just leaves when Spock isn't looking. Shortly after that, Riley starts to lose it too. Spock orders him to leave the bridge and go to sickbay, and Uhura takes over navigation. She's the logical choice in the situation, but Riley makes a thing of it, and it's weird.
Irishman is worth 10,000.
Relieved, Mr. Riley. Lieutenant Uhura, take over the station.
Yes, sir.
Now that's what I like. Let the women work too. Universal suffrage.
Report to sickbay, Mr. Riley.
It's really rare to see Uhura perform a task unrelated to communications, but when it happens, there's usually like this weird acknowledgement from the other characters, like, hey, look how progressive we are. Which only shows that it's a rare thing, and it shouldn't be a rare thing. It would be better if it was just this normal thing that nobody really bats an eye at. But whatever. It's the 60s, and Riley is kind of insane. So let's just chalk it up to that. And Sulu apparently has taken a turn for the worse, or best, depending on how you look at it. Just a few minutes ago, he wanted to go work out in the gym, and now look at him.
Beware.
He's shirtless, drenched in sweat, and he thinks he's a musketeer, and he's ready to go stabbing. He also seems surprised that his sword is pointy. And back on the bridge, they're having problems. They suddenly have no power, and the gravity on the planet has increased. Don't ask me how that's possible, but it's pulling the Enterprise out of its orbit. And Sulu shows up at the wrong time. He starts waving his sword around like a maniac, and he eventually grabs Uhura.
Sulu!
I'll protect you, fair maiden.
Sorry, neither.
It was a bit of an edgy line for 60s television, Uhura acknowledging with pride that she's neither fair nor maiden. And then Spock takes care of business.
I'd like you to teach me that sometime.
Take D'Artagnan here to sickbay.
Scotty, we need power.
And I love how Spock says, take D'Artagnan here to sickbay, which that's a really funny line coming from Spock. And apparently George Takei accidentally whacked William Shatner on the ear or the head in this scene, and he had to go get stitches. But considering their history, maybe it was an accident. Who knows? And the problem with the ship is that Riley has somehow taken over engineering. And all he did to accomplish this was tell Scotty that he was needed on the bridge. And I guess Scotty took all of his engineering staff with him. I mean, there's usually at least half a dozen guys in engineering at any given time. But they all left. And engineering was totally unattended. And once they were out the door, Riley just locked them out. It's insanity. He also turned off the engines. I don't know why he did that. And they have only 20 minutes before they burn up. Kirk runs to engineering and finds Scotty outside the door. And he says the only way to get through the door is to cut through the circuits in the wall next to it. How is that possible? I have a number of faster solutions right off the bat. Number one, shoot the door with a phaser. Number two, beam in. But maybe the transporters are down too, so maybe that's out. And if this was Next Generation, they would just ask the computer to open the door on the authority of the chief engineer or the captain or whoever. But the computer is much more localized in TOS. I don't think it's really capable of controlling ship functions like that, which is unfortunate. So Scotty has to cut a hole in this wall. I mean, I feel like they could just punch through it. It looks like cardboard to me. And Riley is annoying everyone on the ship because he's singing Irish melodies over the loudspeaker. It's really obnoxious. I'm 1/4 Irish, which means I'm about 75% done with Lieutenant Riley right now. And Spock sees a crewman laughing at a paintbrush. Everyone's losing their minds. This thing has spread like wildfire. And Spock gets infected by Nurse Chapel. She's absolutely shit-faced right now. She keeps saying she's in love with Spock. She says it over and over. I mean, holy shit, stop saying it. Do what normal people do and bottle that shit up until you die. Get a hold of yourself. They finally get into engineering. They get rid of Riley, hopefully out an airlock since he may have killed them all. Although he does show up in one other episode, so I guess not. And Scotty says he needs 30 minutes to restart the engines, but they only have 8 minutes before they crash into the planet. If they cold start the engines, the matter and antimatter will mix, and the ship will likely explode. And this scene is referenced by Scotty in the episode of TNG called Relics.
I remember a time when the old Enterprise was spiraling towards Psi 2000.
Yeah, thank you.
And the captain wanted to try a cold start of the warp engines. And I told him that without a proper phase lock, it would take at least 30 minutes.
Check out my video on Relics if you haven't already. And Spock, now infected by the virus, is sobbing mathematically. This is the episode where that meme comes from. He's lost control of his emotions. And this is kind of the scene that made Spock a really popular character. People liked seeing that he's not emotionless, that all his feelings are there, they're just hidden under the surface. And while this is happening, McCoy has figured out what's wrong with Sulu. He's come up with a cure. And he did this very quickly. Doesn't seem like much of a challenge. He mostly just seems annoyed by the whole thing, which is very McCoy. I mean, he's always annoyed. It's another damn space virus to deal with. Take this hypo spray and shut the hell up about it already. And Kirk confronts Spock, who's a mess right now. He's upset that he never told his mother he loved her. He feels bad that he never expressed emotion because it goes against what it means to be Vulcan. And Kirk, with mere minutes before they crash, is trying to snap Spock out of it. And he does this by slapping him.
Jim, when I feel friendship for you, I'm ashamed.
You've got to hear me. We need a formula. We've got to risk implosion.
Never been done.
Spock's obviously not into it, so Kirk decides to slap him again, and it does not go well. And now Kirk is infected, of course, and it affects him really fast. He starts immediately babbling about the burdens of command and how he's kind of obsessed with the Enterprise. He starts feeling the same way about the Enterprise that Arnie feels about Christine in Christine. He also seems to act like he can't get a girlfriend because of his duty to the ship. I mean, give me a break. You're Captain Kirk. I mean, it's not like he's living this celibate lifestyle. It's crazy. And what's even crazier is that Spock seems to have snapped out of it completely. He seems totally back to normal. It's like he transferred the virus from himself to Kirk, and it's just gone. And he comes up with a formula to cold restart the warp engines. So they're ready to give it a try. Kirk makes his way to the bridge. He's all disheveled. And McCoy's been curing everybody with his very quickly produced hypospray. And he rips open Kirk's shirt to administer it, which goes against the whole point of a hypospray. But then again, this might actually be the first episode with the hypospray. I'm not totally sure. So maybe the rules aren't established. And he also may know that Kirk loves to rip his shirt. So I guess maybe he had a quota for the episode to meet. And they hit the warp engines. They break free of the planet. But they're going too fast. They end up going back in time. But they quickly reverse it somehow. And they end up closer to their own time. They're actually 3 days prior to the events of the episode. The follow-up to this was originally supposed to be Tomorrow is Yesterday, which is a time travel episode. But that didn't happen. And I have no idea why they just didn't scrub the time travel shit entirely. Makes no sense. It really added nothing. And the episode ends with Spock saying they can now go back in time whenever they want because they have discovered this formula for time travel. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So many random things in this episode. At one point, they say the planet's mass is decreasing, but the gravity is getting stronger. I mean, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to know that that doesn't make any sense. I mean, unless there's a black hole at the center of this planet, that seems like utter nonsense to me. But I'm not a scientist, so correct me if I'm wrong. But for me, it just gave me a headache. And according to the Amazon Prime trivia feature, Leonard Nimoy said that the idea for this episode came about when he started crying for no reason during a meeting with the writers, which I think is kind of hilarious. It does feel like the entire episode was written around that scene because there's a lot of holes, even for TOS era science. And overall, I think it's just an okay episode. It's not great. It's not one of my favorites, although there are some iconic moments. I just think everything gets wrapped up so quickly in a nice little bow. They have 8 minutes to solve this problem, and a lot happens in that 8 minutes. And there's also a lot of unnecessary problems that are introduced in the closing minutes. There's no reason to do a time travel shit at the end of the episode. Although I suppose it might explain how they know how to do it when they go back in time in Star Trek 4, but they used a different method to do it. They slingshot around the sun at high warp. I mean, that had nothing to do with what happened here. And I don't think cold starting the warp engines is ever really a problem again outside of this episode. Maybe they fixed that particular design flaw really quickly. I don't know. But anyway, that's about all I have to say about this one. Let me know what you thought of it. And until next time, take it easy.